would want to address this, that we had requested judicial or official notice of the annual compliance form, and I guess that will be addressed later. Is that the?
We'll address it later.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, anyway, if you have any questions, and otherwise I'll turn over to Mr.
Yeah,
Thomas.
can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
This kind of goes back to my days as doing permitting versus planning. And I've heard you use some terms interchangeably that concerns me a little bit. And I wanted to maybe get legal review of this concept, which is, in the planning context, we evaluate achievement or attainment of water quality objectives. That's a function of our agency, and in permitting, we evaluate compliance with permit conditions, which are designed to attain water quality objectives. I've heard you use the term comply with water quality objectives, and I'm not real comfortable with that term.
Well, can I just jump in real quick that in
Yeah.
the order it doesn't say, it says achieve water quality objectives as far as I know. So.
Yeah, and you said that mostly, but now and then, just
Yeah,
in terms
sorry.
of, no, it's okay, but I've heard, it from all sides, frankly. And I think it's important for us to be clear about, a waiver or permit conditions, which describe, conditions that are meant and designed to attain or achieve water quality objectives, as a distinct, function or, evaluation from actual, the process that we go through, in 305B and 303D of the Clean Water Act, where we evaluate attainment of water quality objectives. The permit or waiver is designed to attain, but a condition of the permit to comply with water quality objectives, I think I'm concerned with that kind of framework.
And that was a big issue to the regional board, and to make it very clear that the board intended compliance to be implementing the iterative process to do management practices, evaluate them, and improve them if they have not been effective.
Yeah, good.
And that ultimately the purpose of those management practices is to achieve water quality objectives, but they weren't expecting to be enforcing if there's a violation of a water quality objective. They're expecting to enforce if you aren't trying to do, aren't following that iterative process.
Okay.
And we made a lot of efforts to try to make that clear, and think maybe it needs a little more clarity.
No,
So.
it's good. I just, even for the benefit of those who are listening in or here in the audience, that, that let's use the language consistently: achievement or attainment of standards or objectives, compliance with permit conditions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Steve. Mr.
Good morning.
Thomas.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Thanks for having us. Our chairman was going to be here today, Jeff Young, because this is very important to our board. He had a scheduling conflict at the last minute that he could not change, so he apologizes for not being here. This is the highest priority for our board. The water quality situation in our region and the health issues associated with this permit are definitely our highest priorities. I wanted to talk about three things today: the nitrogen reporting in the Central Coast Water Board's order, the expert panel that we're forming, and the annual compliance reporting that's in our order. With respect to the nitrogen reporting requirements, these are fundamental basic requirements that are needed to implement the order. We reviewed 30 years of work by technical experts and researchers, and about 30 years of published reports. We worked with technical experts and researchers while we were developing this order and the requirements that we that the board ended up adopting with respect to the nitrogen reporting. And it was basic fundamental information necessary to show improvements and reduction in pollutant loading and the effectiveness of management practices on farms. These are estimates, as your draft order says, and we acknowledge that, and they are used in the context of being estimates. For instance, the the nitrogen that some crops need is expressed as a range, sometimes 100 to 200 pounds, 100 to 150 pounds. They are by definition estimates. So the question is not whether they are estimates or not. The question is whether these estimates are useful in reducing fertilizer use and resulting pollutant loads. That's how we look at it. And the answer to that question is they are useful. They are being used today. Growers are complying with the order that the Central Coast Board adopted. They are submitting the information in the annual compliance reporting, and they are using that information to reduce their fertilizer use and resulting pollutant loads. And we hear this every day in our communication with growers in our region. The second issue that I wanted to talk about is the expert panel. And with respect to this new panel, we recommend that they focus on the next order, the next iteration of the ag order, ours or others. That order, for us, is coming up in a little over 3 years. These are 5-year orders, but it takes us more than 5 years to work on them and get them established. We've been working on this one for more than 5 years now. So we need to start working on the next one soon, because in a little over 3 years, we're going to need to renew this one. And this order is just an iterative step. It's not the answer, it's just a step. And the next order will be another step. So we need to start thinking about and working on what that order will be, what type of requirements, and what should that order expect, what are the expectations of it, and what should it require. So we recommend against delaying the fundamental requirements in this order that are proven effective on the ground, and instead have the expert panel focus on the future. If the expert panel does happen to come up with improvements that we could incorporate, we can always open the order and consider those specific things. But that isn't delaying useful requirements now. It is considering improving those requirements in the future and opening the order back up. So those are two very different things.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing is the annual compliance form. And we request that the state board clarify their intent with respect to the annual compliance form. We read the draft order to restore the annual compliance form to its state before the stay order, unless there is something specific in this order that you're considering now that changes it. Because when you adopt this order, our understanding is the stay order no longer exists. This is the order that acts to change the Central Coast Board order. And we request that the annual compliance form be restored to its state prior to the stay order. Because again, that annual compliance form and the information that's provided in it are the nuts and bolts of our program, and it's necessary for us to have that information to actually implement the program and show results. With that, I'll turn it over to Angela Schroeder.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
My name is Angela Schroeder. I'm a senior engineering geologist at the Central Coast Water Board, and I manage the agricultural regulatory program. And before I begin talking about some of the details, I just want to thank State Board staff for their efforts to review the agricultural order. So as Michael mentioned, staff at the Regional Board considered more than 30 years of research and data, government reports, and industry publications, and also consulted with experts to inform the development of the agricultural order. And I wanted to provide an example. One such example is a 1988 report authored by the State Water Board titled Nitrate in Drinking Water, and this is in the administrative record, so a report from 1988. Not to be confused with our next report to the legislature in 2013. The 1988 report to the State Water Board documents the nitrate problem in groundwater and also resulted in a nutrient technical advisory committee. The TAC was convened to, quote, propose a nutrient management approach in California that would meet the varied interests of those who have a stake in the quality of California's waters, end quote. One of the key outcomes of that TAC was the development of the Nitrate Groundwater Pollution Hazard Index. The TAC proposed that growers should complete the hazard index for each field. The regional board considered this recommendation of the 1988 TAC convened by the State Water Board and reviewed the nitrate groundwater pollution hazard index in coordination with current experts, and ultimately decided to incorporate into the agricultural order. This information can be found in Administrative Record 197 and 407, and it's just one example of the type of information that we considered in the development of the agricultural order. In addition, the regional board also consulted with experts to inform the development of the agricultural order. One of our staff members, Monica Barcarte, here with us today, has extensive experience with farming practices and working with growers. Monica has a graduate degree in agricultural engineering. She is a certified crop advisor. She is an irrigation specialist, and prior to coming to the regional board, she worked for the Kachuma Resources Conservation District in Santa Maria and was also an irrigation advisor in the private industry. Monica is the staff lead in the development and implementation of irrigation nutrient management requirements in the agricultural order, and she consulted with a group of experts that included private industry, certified crop advisors, as well as UC cooperative extension specialists. The group also included technical advisors and regional board staff from the Central Valley region. Monica worked with this group of experts to evaluate different options for improving irrigation nutrient management. The experts consistently recommended that, quote, documenting the reduction of nitrogen input to the production system and improved irrigation efficiency should be the focus of the agricultural order, end quote. One of their main objectives was specifically to limit the monitoring and reporting burden on growers while still providing the regional board with information to evaluate and verify progress towards water quality improvement. And one of the key outcomes of that group was the need to address the excessive use of fertilizers. The group concluded that identifying how much nitrogen is needed and comparing that to the amount of nitrogen that is applied is a fundamental but critical necessity in preventing nitrate impacts to groundwater. And information regarding the group of experts can be found in the Administrative Record 177, 78, 79, and 195. Finally, as Michael also mentioned, one of our key reporting tools is the annual compliance form. The annual compliance form does not apply to all 4,000 farms. It only applies to Tier 2 and Tier 3 farms, which have a relatively higher risk than Tier 1. And the total number of Tier 2 and Tier 3 farms is about 1,800 farms, less than half. The annual compliance form includes basic reporting about discharge characteristics as well as management practice information. It's an online form with drop-down menu selections intended to be easy for the growers. One example is the requirement to report the estimated typical volume of discharge. The draft order replaces the word volume with magnitude. This change may increase confusion due to the vagueness of the term and decreases the ability of the regional board to use direct measurements to evaluate relative risk to water quality. For example, typical magnitude can be described as a little or a lot, which is not useful compared to volume, which is the result of a direct measurement. As part of the annual compliance form, the regional board included ranges of typical volumes so that the growers did not need to produce a precise measurement. For example, less than 500 gallons per day or more than 20,000 gallons per day. The range of volume of discharge is useful while not requiring a precise measurement, and it is reasonable. More importantly, these measurements of discharge characteristics are essential for the regional board to evaluate risk to water quality and prioritize farms for appropriate follow-up in the most severely impaired areas. Another example on the annual compliance form is to report the nitrate concentration of irrigation water. Nitrate concentration of irrigation water is one of several pieces of information we use to identify and prioritize farms that may be impacting nitrate levels in surface water and groundwater. For example, a farm that is located near an impaired water body for nutrients that has irrigation water with a nitrate concentration of less than 45 milligrams per liter would be lower priority to look at than one that's 200 milligrams per liter. This requirement is reasonable as the regional board only requires growers to report the range of nitrate concentration, which can be determined using an inexpensive field test standard practice. In addition, many growers report that they are already using this information to determine their nitrogen application and nutrient budgeting. We also want to note that more than 1,300 growers have already complied with the requirement to report this information in the annual compliance form. Lastly, I want to emphasize the need for the Tier 3 recording of nitrogen crop uptake and progress towards the nutrient balance ratio. Keep in mind that this requirement only applies to the highest risk Tier 3 farms, less than 100 of the 4,000. Again, experts have indicated that identifying how much nitrogen is needed and comparing that to the amount of nitrogen that is applied is a fundamental but critical necessity in nutrient management to prevent excessive fertilizer use. It is a standard industry practice, and guidelines are available for the predominant high-risk crop types on the Central Coast. And I want to show this example. This is a UC A&R publication that's part of our administrative record, number 2227. And it's a publication titled Nutrient Management in Cool Season Vegetables for the Coast. The publication discusses nitrate pollution, provides specific recommendations about irrigation and nutrient management practices, and provides crop nitrogen uptake values for broccoli, cauliflower, celery, and lettuce, which make up the bulk of the acreage in the Salinas Valley. Take broccoli, for example. On page 2 of this reference, the recommended crop uptake is 180 pounds to 220 pounds per acre of nitrogen. To prevent nitrate pollution to groundwater, growers must compare how much they apply to the standard guideline. It's a fundamental and standard practice. Again, experts have indicated that identifying how much nitrogen is needed and comparing that to the amount of nitrogen that is applied is critical for improving water quality and also has significant potential. And that is how we intend to use the nitrate balance ratios. The Regional Board needs this information to prioritize these higher risk farms for appropriate follow-up. In addition, the board needs this information to evaluate and verify the effectiveness of the order and progress towards water quality improvement. And I'm focusing on these specific examples related to nitrogen because addressing nitrate contamination is the highest priority for this order. There are no compliance points in the order related to nitrogen application or loading reduction. These reporting requirements that I have described are the only reporting requirements that will allow the regional board to measure progress to reduce nitrogen loading over time to better protect water quality. And with that, I'll let Michael conclude. And I also have copies of this report.
Great.
I'd like to see those.
Can I ask a question first before you, just a quick one? You have the A&R and there are published ranges for broccoli. Are there published ranges? I remember this conversation from months ago. I just want to, are there published ranges for every crop that's grown in the Central Valley, or are there places where there's not a ready reference source?
We did an analysis of the acreage, and there are published values for the crop types for nearly 90% of the acreage on the Central Coast, and especially in the Salinas Valley. There are specialized crops, for example, cilantro and specialty crops like that. However, what the draft order says is that in those cases, growers can use a substitute crop type, or they can present us with what they think the crop needs and the basis for their fertilizer decision-making practices. So certainly a grower just doesn't guess. They have some knowledge of what their crop needs, and they would present that to the water board.
Okay.
And that was a key consideration. When we develop the requirements, we want to develop requirements that are reflective of what's actually happening in the region for most of the acreage. There will always be more information that could be obtained or better information. We expect over time the estimates for the ranges of nitrate use will change. Some may be broadened, some may be narrowed. We expect that will change over time. New crops might come into play, but we couldn't not include basic fundamental requirements that do cover the vast majority of acreage based on anomalies or the hope for additional information in the future. That's it.
Back to you. Oh,
We're done.
okay.
Unless you have any other questions.
Well, I'll turn it to questions. I just want to, for the sake of the rest of the thing, that was very good, keeping within your time frame. And some of you who may not be familiar who heard that, the ding-dong sound, that's the 5-minute warning. So I just, generally, those of you in panels have, I hopefully prepared your panels within that time frame, and I'd just like you to listen for that and try to keep within it. We've given generous time, as asked for all the participants, and it makes for I would say, a calmer and more thoughtful presentation. And plus, I hate to tell people they have to stop, so it would be much better if you did, because I will tell you to stop pretty quickly upon the end of the time. So thank you for modeling good timing behavior.
Madam Chair, if I have a quick question, Darren here. Just
oh yeah, Darren,
quick
you
question
get to ask
from
questions.
Angela.
Oh, sorry, I was gonna
I
start
must.
here, but go ahead.
Could you repeat the record number for the? I think it was the UC report on broccoli. The numbers.
227, 228, and I believe 229. I have a copy here too. I can hand it to you.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions over there? Okay, questions over here. Start with you.
Yeah, just one.
Sure.
Thanks for bringing us back to 1988 and other processes that went on around nitrate.
Just as long as we don't have to go back to the clothes and the hair. I'm fine with that.
Yes, I agree with the chair. I was just curious, I mean, yeah, the advisory committee was formed. Do you have any recollection or documentation of who participated on the technical advisory committee back in '88 and what type of expertise they had, just as far as filling out that discussion?
I don't have the details. It's pretty sparse
Sure.
since it goes that far back. I do know that CDFA was involved in that effort, as well as UC Cooperative Extension. It actually, I think, prompted some of the FREP research, and then maybe CDFA will speak to that. But I've heard that report. You know, it's sort of referencing way back when we started this effort and report to the legislator about the problems in nitrate.
Yeah, so it was, there was a broad, a sufficiently broad perspective brought, from your perspective. Yeah.
I was just, is that the 1988?
That's correct. That's the 1988 report.
And then there was another expert panel that the state board convened in the 90s, in the mid-90s, correct?
That's the technical advisory committee as a result of this report.
And that, who was on that one is probably more available. I imagine that information is more readily available. There is also an expert panel that has been convened by UC Davis Center for Sustainable Agriculture. They were convened in 2009 with a grant from the Packard Foundation. They also have an advisory group, and I think there are approximately 350 people on that advisory group with representation from EJ groups, agencies, and many, many ag groups. And their goals were to deal with many of the big picture questions that Darren said earlier, like the nitrate use in California and the impacts, and its the need to use its benefit to agriculture, and regulations and policy, and proposed requirements or policy to improve use and deal with the water quality and health issues. They have preliminary results out this month, but those results are undergoing peer review right now, so they're waiting on their final report. And so I think we should take notice of that effort, and Mr. Moore, to go along with your question and figure out who's on it, who's on that panel.
I think it's referred to as the California Nitrogen Assessment.
All that information is readily available. The work's being done and finalized right now.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stick around. We may have more questions after hearing from other people. I know you'll stick around. All right. Next, we're going to turn to the ag petitioners who have an hour in total. And please introduce your speakers, just in case it's not my cards.
Well, and I actually, if we want to
Come up to
Yeah, so everybody can hear.
and actually, instead of lumping all of our time, we all kind of have our own, and I think the notice even said we have
You would
our own.
15-minute increments,
Yeah,
right?
so I think to make sure us lawyers, we'll talk over each other if you give us the opportunity, so.
It might be entertaining.
It could be.
Now, I have 3 cards, and I know you have 4, so we'll just,
Yeah, and I don't know.
Guess
Mr.
on who
Johnson
the
may or
fourth
may
is.
not decide, or Mr. Elliott may or may not decide to use his, some time. He kind of allocated his to the rest of us. But I know for the 3 of us, we want to make sure we each have the ability to provide comments with respect to our individual petitioners. We are individual
course.
petitioners. So I don't know if we want to break that up or how we want to.
why don't we break it up in 15 minute increments, and I don't know what exactly to do with your comment about Mr. Elliott wanting, because I don't have an Elliott
Well,
card.
we can figure that out or whatever. So.
Well, yeah, somehow we can figure it out at the lunch break. How's that? Because we'll take the lunch break somewhere in there. Okay. Mr. Thomas, are you going first? Your card's on top, but
It is on top.
yeah.
And Ocean Mist and RC Farms is going to go first. Dale Huss of Ocean Mist will speak first. I'll fill in a couple of gaps, perhaps. Then we'll.
Okay. Terrific. Can you just make sure that they have a spelling of your last name? That's part of the value of the cards.
H-U-S-S as in Sam.
That's- Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Hess.
Well, first I want to thank the board, Chair Marcus, giving us the opportunity to come and speak to you today. My name is Dale Huss. I'm the Vice President of Artichoke Production for Ocean Mist Farms. I'm also the General Manager and a partner of Sea Mist Farms, one of the growing entities for Ocean Mist. I'm the Chairman of the Water Quality and Operations Committee for the Monterey County Water Recycling Projects, and I'm co-chair of the Watsonville Water Recycling Projects of the Pajaro Valley. I've personally been involved in growing crops from artichokes and the other cool season vegetable crops in all soils ranging from blow sand to heavy clay. I'm responsible for the oversight and the supervision of certain production operations at Ocean Mist and Ocean Mist's in-house grower enrollment in 2012 Central Coast Ag Discharge Waiver. We're based in Castroville with some 37 farms throughout several areas of the Central Coast. We also farm in other regions of the state, including the Central Valley, Coachella Valley, the Oxnard Plain, Yuma, Arizona, Mexico, depending on the time of the year, as well as the Imperial Valley. We employ nearly 2,000 employees at peak season and maintain an average workforce of 1,500 individuals during the year. We have been very much engaged in water quality management and have cooperated with the Elkhorn Slough Foundation on several of their environmental restoration projects. We've given testimony every step of the way in this process of the adoption of the new ag waiver for irrigated lands. We gave testimony at this board's hearing in Sacramento on August 30th, which eventually led to many of the provisions set down by the Regional Water Quality Control Board's adopted order of March 12th being stayed. I'm going to talk about two things, tile drains and nitrogen. And for those of you who don't know, a tile is essentially plastic pipe of different diameters that is trenched into the fields that we're farming that essentially remove water from below the surface, in other words, perch water, as well as irrigated water that essentially used for leaching out some of the bad guys, mainly sodium and chloride. They usually go to a common outfall and where they are collected in a containment structure, eventually pumped out into a drain ditch. So, beginning in the 1930s, seawater intrusion became an issue in the 180-foot aquifer next to the coast of Salinas Valley. We began to document the movement and spread of seawater intrusion in 1944. The second aquifer in the Salinas Valley at 400 feet is intruded up to Highway 1 and currently threatens Castroville's drinking water. The visionaries in the Salinas Valley began thinking to recycle water to irrigate cool season vegetable crops back in the 1970s, and a study was done, the Marissa study, that eventually finished with a report in 1987 and proved that wastewater could be cleaned up and used for irrigation of the valuable crops that we grow on the Central Coast. The water, however, comes with high levels of sodium and high levels of chlorides. The current levels of both of these elements in our recycled water for irrigation are considered high by agronomic standards. Sodium, of course, is a large molecule that ties up the soil and we need to be able to leach it and the chloride out to be able to grow our crops productively. In order to slow the rate of intrusion and protect existing groundwater supplies, the Catchville Seawater Intrusion Project began delivering recycled water to 12,000 acres of some of the most fertile farmland in North Salinas Valley in 1998. Soils in CSIP, Catchville Seawater Intrusion Project, are clay loam to heavy clay and tend to drain poorly naturally. With the addition of irrigation water high in sodium and chloride, these lands would eventually be rendered unproductive for high-value agricultural crops. Tile drains remove these excess harmful ions from the root profile, allowing for long-term sustainability and productivity of these soils. Now, interestingly enough, lands outside of the Catchville Seawater Intrusion Project that do not have tile drains still need to leach these harmful ions out of the soil profile to be able to grow crops productively. Eventually, the sodium and the chloride ions would build up in those soils if you did not do that. It did not happen either through rainwater or a leaching fraction added to that irrigation event. Because of the highly beneficial use of the drains, the long-term sustainability of the soils in the region, we strongly urge the State Water Resource Control Board to remove any restriction on tile drain use in the current ag order. There's no science to support any alternative to tile drains. As such, the tile drain discharges will never achieve the compliance standards timeline set forth in the current order. It's not to say there isn't work going on right now looking at ways to mitigate that, but it's not there yet. Forcing landowners and growers to turn off the tile drains will lead to productive farmlands becoming unproductive, lost jobs, and a sharp decline in land values because we won't be able to produce the high value crops on that land that we currently do. Nitrogen. Growing a successful crop is not only science-based, it's also an art that has developed over years of knowing and understanding how crops grow in certain environmental conditions and soils. It's experience garnered through decades knowing what a crop may be lacking at a critical stage through observation and past successes or failures. Ignoring the art of farming jeopardizes the competitive nature of the business by lumping all growers into the same category. I've actually been told by one of the regional board staff that that's part of the purpose of it all, so that more efficient growers can help out that less efficient grower. As a competitive business, we're not in the business of helping out our less competitive grower. Please understand that. The high-value crops grown in the region are expensive to grow and cultivate profitably. Land values are high. Input and labor costs continue to increase. Crops have to be grown intensively, sometimes growing and harvesting 2 to 3 crops per acre over a 6 to 8 month period of time. Very intense. The cultivation of cool season vegetable crops on the Central Coast is high-risk business that can cost over $4,000 an acre to grow before any crop is harvested off an acre of ground. Fertilizer costs vary, depending on the crop, from between $200 an acre per crop up to as much as $350 an acre per crop, depending on the crop. Nitrogen is the most important nutrient that cool season vegetable crops require to be grown successfully. Over the past several years, we've cut back our nitrogen use significantly, mainly because of cost. Those costs have tripled in the last 5 to 6 years. And as businessmen, as business people, we look to reduce our costs. Fertilizer is a variable cost for us. We no longer put heavy pre-plant applications on going into the winter months unless we expect to plant within a few weeks. Because if we get rainfall, that nitrogen is gone. And so we try and wait and time those applications so that we get our best bang for our buck. However, if we believe that our crop is short of nitrogen or any other nutrient, we will apply to ensure the successful harvest of the crop. Investment dollars are too great not to do otherwise. If we come up with small lettuce, it isn't going to make it. Market won't want it. To wait until we get lab results and the advice of an expert who may never have grown a field of lettuce, broccoli, cauliflower, etc., may be too late to take the crop to maturity. The art of a timed application of nitrogen fertilizer is as important as the amount applied. Finally, regulation is a double-edged sword. For example, the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board has taken measures to stop the Salinas River Channel Maintenance Program until a new EIR is in place. Ironically, the Salinas River Channel is so clogged with vegetation in places that normal rainfall will likely create flooding events that will lead to extensive erosion and sediment loading to the Salinas River and the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. These sediments carry the very nutrient loads that the State Water Resources Control Board and the Regional Water Quality Control Board are trying to restrict from leaving the properties being farmed. The next flooding event will likely cause more damage to the environment than all the farming activities combined in the Salinas Valley since the flood of March 12, 1995. I remember it well. Finally, when it comes to compliance issues, and I appreciate the comments by Chairman Moore, but on the draft order, or on the order, it talks about compliance dates, not timelines to achieve, but compliance dates. And currently, I see no way, if compliance is the issue, that we can comply with some of the reductions required by 2015, 2016, and 2017. I don't see it as being possible. Thank you.
I have some questions. So I'd like to get some information from you. First of all, are you taking efforts to comply with the order right now? In other
Yes.
words, are you one of the farmers that the Central Coast has referred to that have been filing reports?
As far as I know, we have complied with all the regulation, but it is complicated. One of the things that we're considering doing is, because ag operations run lean, we're trying to figure out at this point, do we need to go out and hire somebody that could monitor and make sure we are in compliance? Because there are so many details and so many things, and how do you take pictures, and how do you do this, and how do you do that, that it's impossible for our general managers, who we expect to grow successful crops, to be able to take care and oversee and make sure we're doing everything. I know that our general managers have been in contact with the board. I know they've talked with Monica and some others down there, just asking questions, trying to make sure we're doing things right. And to my knowledge, we've complied up to this point in time.
So can you provide an estimate as to the costs of preparing these reports and costs of sampling?
Well, I'm gonna refer to it in terms of if we have to hire somebody, and it looks like we might for our operation. We're probably looking at between $100,000 and $150,000 just for our organization. I think that when it comes to cost currently, because not everything is being done right now. I mean, the cooperative groundwater monitoring model has just been approved, and we're looking at that and trying to figure out if that's going to work for us. We're going to do it ourselves. We're going to do that. And so a lot of those costs right now are virtual for us. We don't really understand where they're exactly at. I estimate in the end it could cost us between $100 and $200 an acre. That's my best guess right now.
Okay, and then the other question that I had has to do with use of crop advisors. You say that your use of fertilizer has been reduced over the past several years, mainly because of cost, but are you utilizing experts to assist you in, just generally speaking, crop uptake, yield, and the correlation between fertilizer use and success?
Yes and no. I mean, where we are is with experience within the organization as far as what a crop looks like when it looks like it's going to be successful to harvest. The best fertilizer that we have available to us is our growers' footprints through the fields, making sure they see what's going on out there. Now, going back to your other question, there's very few experts out there that are willing to put it out on the table when it comes to making a recommendation on what you need to do to a crop to make it successful. There are very few of them out there that have done it. Now, we do consult them, don't get me wrong. We have pest control advisors that make recommendations on using pesticides. And our fertility people are coming in, they're offering services. We take soil samples before we plant the crop to see where things are at. We may take petiole samples throughout the season, but we don't find them necessarily that valuable. I don't as a grower, because by the time I get those results back, that event is gone. And I may not be able to get that crop back. So I got to be looking at the crop, making decisions in the field at the time to determine what I need to go with as far as fertilizers. Usually a nitrogen input whenever we need to do it. I mean, that's the key thing.
How many farms did you say you had, or how much acreage did you say you had in the area in Region 3?
In Region 3, we're probably between 8,000 and 10,000 acres. Yeah.
Well, and of those, are they in Tier 3, 2, 1? I mean,
One and twos.
1 and 2s?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I understand that's because of crop type and the size and whatever.
I just have one. Obviously, farming is both art and science. There's no question about it as you open. But do you, if there is, and I'm presuming there is, one of those crop sheets from UC Davis or somewhere else for artichokes, is that the range of that published document right or wrong?
I've never seen one on artichokes.
Oh, maybe there isn't one on artichokes.
I'm not saying there's one out there, but I've never seen it.
All right. The only thing I wanted to know is whether you disagreed with something that was specifically out there or suggested, or were just making the point about it being a combination of art and science, which I think is a very valid point.
Yeah, I have never seen anything on artichokes that suggests the range. Again, a lot of what happens, if you're talking artichokes and perennial artichokes versus annual artichokes, perennial artichokes, of course, have been in the ground for a year up to 20 years. And a lot of the decisions on making applications when it comes to a crop like that produces like it does heavy in the springtime is dependent on the weather and the environment. If we get a lot of rainfall, then coming into our peak production season, we can't afford to let the crop run out of end. We just can't. And so we may have to go into apply. Sometimes we go into apply by hand. That's the only way we have to get it done. Not the way we prefer to do it, but sometimes it's the only way we can do it.
Thank you. That's helpful. Appreciate it. Mr. Thomas. And just so you know, when we ask questions, it does not take away from your time on the clock. Now the clock will restart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be very brief. Bill Thomas, I represent Ocean Mist and RC Farms, two of the leading vegetable growers in the Central Coast. And Dee Dee, to your question, Ocean Mist and RC are in the very lead of involvement in the water quality issues over in the coast. Want to say one or two things further on tile drains. Everyone knows that agriculture is pretty dependent on tile drains in many of our valley basins. Tile drains in ocean mist operations are totally pivotal because they worked, as was made reference to, with the local communities to deal with their reclaimed water and the saltwater intrusion. And so the irrigation systems throughout all this farmland that Ocean Mist has developed were developed with tile drainage put in so it could become productive. And so that water could then be further cleansed through photodegradation, through running through the soil and vegetative, and then made much improved by the time it gets to those tile drains. Those tile drains are part of the farming system. They're part of the field mechanism of irrigation and drainage. And as we developed this order, we were told many times we're not going to deal with tiles. But of course, as it's written, now there's supposed to be a monitoring component to tiles. These are not waters of the state. They're part of the farm structure. If we're required to monitor and report to you what's in the tile drains, it was never intended to be pure by any means. It's going to exceed standards, and we're not then going to be able to continue to farm these fields in that fashion. It's also unnecessary. As was indicated, these tile drains go out to containment structures, and then they go to the surface waters of the state, which are then monitored as part of this order. The reason you're hearing a lot about tile drains, that's the component that puts at risk our farming operation, and it has arisen late in the process. The nitrates, clearly our most important problem to deal with. It's just unfortunate that it's the most important single element on the periodic table to agriculture. And not just in this region, we are wholly engaged in this nitrate to groundwater, nitrate to drinking water, unquestionably a problem. Much progress is being made. More needs to be made to be responsible in our nitrate usage. But the water code screams expressly for reasonableness. So the difficulty for your board is to how do we strike that balance? What's our timeline and how do we do it? We wholly support much of the order that you have advanced. Certainly the creation of a true expert panel. Many of these components regarding the calculating nitrate risk, there's at least 3 or 4 different approaches to that that's being talked about in this and this board and the Central Valley Board. Nitrate rate or nitrate ratio or the nitrate hazardous risk index. There's probably others, but those are ones being advanced. This panel has to hopefully guide us to what of these tools, because they've only been tools, can and should be used in a regulatory context. Also, calculation of the nitrate load getting down to the groundwater. What is the effect of the assimilative value of soils? These and many other of these sort of issues, we long for some guidance to you, to this region, to Region 5.
And just to remind you of the time.
Yes.
It's up, I'm keeping track, so
I'm
I'm
within
fair
a
to
minute
other people, but.
Of being done. We shouldn't prejudge these issues and we shouldn't pre-regulate these issues. We're going to be through this expert panel thing in 8, 10, maybe it'll drag on 12 months. It isn't that we're doing nothing with this order now. We have farm plans. We're going to be monitoring nitrate and groundwater. All of that is coming about. What the regional board, had wanted to do is to limit us to a 1-to-1, a 1-to-2 ratio of how, if they were farmers, they would think you should farm. That's a piece of regulation that borders on your authority limit and is certainly premature until we get some guidance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. All right. Who's next? It's one. I'll go with one more 15-minute increment and questions.
Good morning,
Thank you.
or good afternoon. Ready? Tess Dunham here today on behalf of the Western Growers, the Grower Shipper Association of the Central Coast, and the Grower Shipper Association of San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties. And I'm going to make some general comments, and the president of the Grower Shipper Association of San Luis and San Luis and Santa Barbara counties is here if you have any specific questions to her as to what her members are facing, as well as the vice president for the Central Coast for any specific information that her members are facing as well. So I offer them up to the, sacrificial lamb, so to speak. I'm going to tee off a little bit, I think, where Bill left off, but before I do that, I do want to go back to a very key issue. And Member Moore, you asked a specific question that I thought was key as far as compliance with water quality objectives. And obviously, this has been an issue we deal with in the stormwater program, right? This is a constant issue when we're dealing with, do we have an iterative management compliance program or requiring strict compliance with water quality objectives? And I understand that there's, good intentions that no, this is all about an iterative management process, but unfortunately, the language of the order, and I call specifically to provision 22 and provision 23 on page 18 of the order. And the language is specifically that dischargers must comply with applicable water quality standards, and dischargers must comply with the applicable provisions. Now, the draft order goes in and discusses how, well, we believe we read this in context with the other provisions with respect to implementation, and immediate compliance isn't required, and I appreciate the intent behind that, but having dealt with the stormwater program, sometimes good intentions don't always end up with the best result when things end up in the litigation world. So we continue to suggest that the language with respect to how it is written, the strict interpretation of the provision in the permit, is that dischargers must comply. I do believe the language that the State Board staff has proposed with respect to the compliance on provision 82 is helpful in that it does provide some specific language with respect to compliance as far as an iterative good faith effort approach. We appreciate that. We would not be supportive of the alternative language that the regional board has proposed. And frankly, I'm not sure that legally you could even adopt such language, because all it says is we won't we won't impose immediate penalties. Well, that's kind of binding the hand of a future board. Enforcement is discretionary. It doesn't resolve the issue of whether someone is in compliance with the provision or not. It basically says, well, you're really out of compliance, but we're going to not subject you to penalties immediately. And I'm just not sure that you can do that in a quasi-judicial order such as this, since your enforcement authority is under different authorities. So we would not support the regional board's suggested revisions with respect to that issue. Just wanted to get that one out of the way real quick. Teeing up from where Mr. Thomas left off, wholeheartedly agree with the comments that, a lot of these tools that have been developed, the hazard index, the farm plan itself, the nitrogen ratios, have all been tools, guidance, and management tools developed to help assist farmers in making management decisions. They were not developed in a regulatory context for regulatory purposes. We do think that the expert panel approach that has been proposed in the draft order is a much better approach to determine, okay, we've got these guidance and management tools, but how do we take them and potentially make them and fit them into our regulatory metrics that we have? Because they are two totally different things. And we would be concerned with going down the road of back where the regional board order is to require reporting on some of these guidance and management tools at this point in time until the expert panel has convened and made its recommendations as to what it believes is appropriate. And I believe that's what the regional board, has made in their responses, and here today has talked about, well, these are basic reporting requirements. I disagree. These are management guidance tools that have a certain value that the draft order intends to maintain for its intended purpose at this time until the expert panel does what it needs to do. To use them as a reporting requirement at this point in time is taking that guidance tool and using it as a regulatory hammer. They talk extensively in the responses how it would be used to prioritize enforcement, prioritize their efforts. Well, to me, that isn't using it for its intended purpose, that is using it for as a regulatory tool. And I'm just not sure that they are appropriate tools at this time to be using that for. And, you know, to that end, find my notes. The regional board has made a couple of, you know, we've talked a little bit about the nutrient ratio, and I do want to bring out some comments with respect to the nutrient ratios itself, that even from one of their, you know, the individuals that they consulted in their process in looking at the record, and it's in the administrative record 109, and it's comments that were received from some of the folks that then participated in their work group on the nitrogen nutrient efforts. And they've suggested that perhaps these folks concluded and supported the language that's in the waiver. And I have to tell you, I've gone back and I've looked at the record citations they provided in their response. And there's a number of meeting minutes that don't necessarily attribute what the experts they consulted said one way or the other. It's a staff summary of issues, but it doesn't really say so-and-so said this or so-and-so said that or so-and-so agreed. So it's very difficult to make a determination what these experts actually agreed with or not based upon the record before us. And in fact, there's a number of emails that are only from regional board staff. There are 0 emails from these panel members in response to email questions that were posed to them. So whether no one ever responded by email, I don't know, but I was kind of surprised that there wouldn't be any documentation from these experts documenting what their thoughts were. Most of us have an iterative process back and forth when we consult with such experts. And in fact, in AR 109, one of the experts on the nutrient ratio issue itself talks about, you know, kind of this definition of excess fertilizer application. Well, there are no clear, and I quote, there are no clear standards established for what would constitute excess fertilization. And this is a UC Cooperative Extension expert, Tim Hartz. Although we have collected data on nutrient uptake of some of the major vegetable crops, we have not done this for all important regional crops, including strawberries. Furthermore, given the dynamic nature of the crop rotations practiced, the differences in seasonality, spring versus summer crops, and the wide range of nitrate concentrations in irrigation water, crop nutrient requirements will vary substantially among fields and circumstances, which suggests to me that there really aren't any typical crop nutrient uptake values. And the problem we have, if growers are required to be reporting nutrient ratios based upon typical crop nutrient uptake values that are then going to be used for prioritization and compliance purposes, we have quite a bit of subjective determination as to what is typical when clearly the experts have stated that it really is almost a field by field, crop by crop determination. So it's a difficult standard to try to measure. I also want to point out in the regional board's response on page 13 of their comment letter, and I'm not trying, or actually page 14, and I'm not trying to do a tit for tat. I don't believe that's helpful and I don't believe that's useful, but I do think it's important occasionally to make some points. On page 14, in the middle paragraph, it talks about that, it says, you know, furthermore, the amount of nitrogen applied to a particular crop varies widely among growers, period. Some growers apply less than what a certified crop advisor recommends as the typical crop nitrogen uptake, and some growers apply 3, 4, and 5 times as much nitrogen as is recommended. The footnote to the references in the record, well, I went and I looked at these references in the record, and what I was expecting to find are specific testimony or comments from experts or CCAs saying they made recommendations that growers violated, which to me is what the comment says. Maybe that wasn't its intent. Well, I went and looked at those references, and what they are the reports that experts have put to, or that folks put together after grants based upon their field trials as what growers could do to help lower their nitrogen use in lettuce and other crops. And they were PowerPoint presentations. They were educational materials designed to educate growers, and they were reports on grants that had been provided. There was nothing to suggest that any CCA in the Central Coast has ever said or testified that they make recommendations and growers ignore them. So I was a little bothered by the context of that statement, and I just wanted to correct, and with my understanding of the references for which had been provided. I also want to talk very briefly on the individual surface water monitoring requirements. We would support the draft order as proposed.